Economic turmoil, layoffs, hiring freezes, weakening advertising sales, bullshit stats, dumb money, bad practices. 2023 is going to hurt. Ladies and gentlemen, podcasting as we know it is dead. Welcome to the Creative Control Room Podcast, episode number 114. I'm your operator, Ryan Hafey. This is my Creative Control Room, and this is a podcast for podcasters. Now, that intro was obviously a bit of exaggeration, a little bit of hyperbole, if you will, but there have been a number of articles that came out recently that spelled disaster for podcasting in 2023. So in this episode, I'm going to go through and break down the arguments in those articles, offer some reasons why podcasting really isn't in any danger of going away, and I will also give some of my general thoughts on the matter. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. We're going to start with the bad news first. What are some of the things that are impacting podcasting as we know it in 2023? The kind of the big overarching theme is really concerns about the economy. There's a lot going on in the economy right now. As Bloomberg reports, correction, the following is from The Verge. There have been quite a few disruptions in 2022. The war in Ukraine pushing up energy costs, high inflation making everything from vegetables to auto insurance more expensive, and rising interest rates pushing stock prices down. So what does that mean for podcasting? Well, tech and media companies, the tech and media space has already been impacted by some of these economic fears. There's been talks about a possible recession. Some people believe we're already in a recession. Some believe that we're about to jump into one. And when that happens, you know, like we mentioned, interest rates go up. People stop spending as much. They start saving more. That means less revenue that goes into these companies. And, you know, when you have less revenue to work with, in a lot of cases, you have to start making cuts. And when you make cuts, when you're faced with a decision of what to cut, typically it's often the marketing budgets that end up going first. There've already been layoffs and hiring freezes within the tech space. Bloomberg, again, reports that Acast AB, which is a podcast company, recently laid off 15% of its workforce. SiriusXM is planning to reduce its staff. Spotify laid off some of its podcast editorial workers, in addition to employees at its podcast at its Gimlet Media and Parcast studios. And also NPR revealed that it would institute budget cuts and a near hiring freeze. So we're already seeing some movement in the media space, and that's trickling down. And what that's doing is it's resulting in weakening ad sales. As I mentioned, when these companies are looking to save money, they're cutting their marketing budgets. So from The Verge, when businesses have to make a choice between things like staffing, operations, consumer experience, and marketing is usually the first to go. This means that fewer ad dollars are flowing into the businesses that depend on them, which includes traditional media, digital media, and social media. Podcasting is clearly under that umbrella there. The Verge continues, for 2023, eMarketer estimates that podcast ad revenue should still grow by 28.8%, which is nearly the same growth rate as 2022, but that is also about half the growth rate podcasting experienced in 2021. Worse, that rate is expected to drop by more than 10 points in 2024. So to kind of summarize all that, what does that mean? There's less ad sales, which means less money in the pockets of the media companies and the podcasts that they license. And this could ultimately lead to less and less investment into the space and potentially into new podcasts. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see where that goes. We'll have to wait and see how the economy progresses through the year. Hopefully it's not as bad as they say. Next, there's certainly some oversaturation within the podcast market. Forbes reports around the globe, there are more than 400 million podcast listeners who tune in for all sorts of content. Because of that high listenership, there are over 2 million independent podcasts with tens of millions of episodes between them. So what does that mean? It just means that there's a lot to go around. Podcasting has become mainstream in many ways. It's been around for a long time. It's been around since 2004. And, I mean, when something catches on like that, you're going to get a lot of people, including myself, who kind of jump in to try to take advantage of it. And there's been a lot of talk about how, the popularity of podcasting, it received a big push in the last couple of years. So, naturally, a lot of new podcasts popped up. But what that's done is it's sort of created an environment where it's harder for new creators, especially, to kind of make a name for themselves. Bloomberg reports, as of August, none of the 10 most popular podcasts in the US had debuted in the last couple of years. For new podcasts, getting widespread attention can feel harder than ever. Not the best dynamic for producers looking to attract outside investors in new products. So it's becoming harder and harder for the little guy to make a name for themselves, while a lot of these big players are kind of dominating those top spaces and earning kind of the bulk of the revenue. So there's just a lot to choose from out there. And it's just getting harder to come up and make a name for yourself. And I feel that as well. There's also outdated tech and a lack of innovation within the podcasting space. Nick Hilton, who is a writer and podcast entrepreneur, wrote in a piece on Medium, he said, "For a long time, I felt that podcasting has been stagnant, content to run off aging technology and unwilling to innovate its way into new demographics. A podcast in 2022 looks and sounds almost indistinguishable from a podcast in 2004. And in every year of the medium's existence, it's been described as the next big thing." And I would agree with that. Podcasting has been around really for a long time. I remember it was back in 2009 when I started my first podcast. It was just a very simple audio podcast. I did it for a short period of time just because I was interested in it and wanted to kind of test the waters a little bit. But that was all the way back in 2009. And if you think about it today, I mean, podcasting, at least on the audio side, really works the exact same way that it did back then. So not much has changed in that respect. What's really changed is how podcasting has evolved into other areas like video and how it's being used on social media. In a way, it's been hyped up for so long, but at its core, it just really hasn't evolved much. It's almost as if podcasting is kind of outpacing itself. It's becoming more popular, but you are not seeing the innovation match the speed at which podcasting is growing in popularity, if that makes sense. Then we have bad deals and industry practices. I haven't dove into this too extensively yet, but I do recall seeing some headlines that talk a lot about, how there's been some deceptive reporting within the podcast industry. People reporting, I don't want to say fake, but just kind of fudging the numbers when it comes to the listenership that they're getting from some of these audio podcasts. And they're doing that obviously as a way to attract more advertisers and to generate more ad revenue. But that's a problem. And, I think you can only get away with lying for so long before it's going to come back to bite everybody in the butt. Vulture said one producer, "I think there's going to be a wider reality check about numbers and how they relate to the financing of shows. Everyone in the industry knows numbers are often fudged or based off bullshit stats. And with the global economy on precarious footing, perhaps speculative capital's role in podcasting will force some shows to close and perhaps nudge us closer to a reckoning of what a podcast really is for and how its success is measured." So really, some people are expecting in 2023 and beyond a kind of a correction within the podcast industry, kind of a term that people like to use, a draining of the swamp in the industry, which could ultimately be a good thing, which we're going to touch on in a little bit. But just to kind of summarize, this is the main reasons why people believe that podcasting could be in some trouble. First of all, you've got economic concerns, which is resulting in weakened advertising or weakened audio ad sales. You've got oversaturation, too many podcasts out there. You've got outdated tech and lack of innovation in the space, and just some bad practices going around. Next up, let's talk about some of the good news. Now, it's not all doom and gloom out there. There are some experts that still believe that podcasting is going to be just fine. in 2023 and as we go into the future. From Bloomberg, many in the industry expect 2023 to be a strong year, no matter what the skeptics are saying. YouTube formally entered the podcast space in August, and networks that have posted shows on the platform hope to benefit from its billions of users. Multiple companies see international markets as an untapped opportunity to distribute domestic hits abroad, and the need for new technology is high, possibly presenting different merger and acquisition opportunities. Forbes goes on to say, given the growth of the podcasting space in recent years, people are clearly looking for all kinds of content that didn't exist before, and there is still untapped potential. And I think, and I'm going to summarize this a little bit more when I get to my general thoughts, but I tend to lean in this direction. I think, yes, there's a lack of innovation in the space, but I also think that opens the door for a lot of opportunity and a lot of interesting things to come. I think kind of in life in general, when you hit rock bottom, not saying that's where podcasting necessarily is going, but when you hit a low, that's when you kind of see the best of things come out. That's when you start to see things flourish. And I think people are going to see that podcasting has taken a little bit of a hit, and they will do some interesting things and creative things to try to revive it a little bit. And that could lead to a lot of innovation. As we kind of touched on a little bit already, a market correction could be a good thing for podcasting in the long run. Again, you could see some of those technological innovations. There are people that think, we'll start to see the introduction of some interesting new formats and show formats within podcasting. We could weed out a lot of the bad practices. We talked about the deceptive reporting of metrics, which are designed to bring in more ad dollars. As Vulture reports, the short term is going to be hard, yes, but if it flushes out dumb money and bad practices, then the community will be coming out on the other side better than where it started. I like that mentality there specifically. Also from the Hollywood Reporter, where does this leave creators? An opportunity to lean in on great niche content instead of trying to replicate existing shows and formats that audiences may be growing tired of, says Tangia Al-Awaji Estrada, who's the co-founder of BIPOC, I hope I'm saying that right, BIPOC Podcast Creators and the host of That's What She Did. She says, podcasting is going to be just fine. I really believe that podcasting is still so young that a huge market change isn't going to blow up the entire world. She continues, there's going to be some tightening of the belts probably across the board. But by the time we come out of things, I think we will have seen podcasting continue to grow through the recession. So regardless of how you look at it, it seems that experts believe, for better or for worse, that 2023 is going to be a year of change for podcasting. Some other predictions that I've seen is that podcasting will, as it goes along, become more intimate and gated. Think about like OnlyFans and Patreon, where people are offering more exclusive experiences. Some people think that podcasting is going to move more in that direction. Some other people think that you will start to see some new trends, including more inclusion of video and interactivity into podcasting. Who knows? We'll have to see what happens. All right, so now that we've heard from both sides of the great podcast debate, these are my general thoughts on everything for whatever it's worth. I definitely think that assuming the worst, assuming that we find ourselves in more of a recession, we'll definitely see some shakeouts in the media space, in the podcasting space. I think it's going to most heavily impact the big media companies and the big players in the podcast game. You're going to see less ad revenue flowing through. I think that could have a bit of a trickle down effect on some of these smaller creators who also rely on advertising revenue. But ultimately, the little guy isn't as reliant. Someone who's starting their own podcast, especially from scratch, they're not as reliant on advertising revenue, at least in the beginning. They might even be a little bit more willing to kind of put in the effort to make a splash and make a name for themselves. I think as this shakeout happens, if it happens, you're going to see people exit the industry, and then you're going to see smaller creators probably seizing the opportunity to jump in and try to make a name for themselves. In fact, I'm kind of hoping that's what happens. I think that whatever sort of correction we see within the industry, brings upon some new creative podcast formats and innovation. And I hope it comes from the little guy versus from the top down. I think that's the way that it should be. One thing I also noticed in going through all of this is that really the focus that they mention when it comes to advertising sales is really on the audio podcasting side. But podcasting these days is so much more than just audio. Yes, we talk about the lack of tech and innovation, but the evolution, like podcast has evolved quite a bit. You almost can't call a podcast if it's only audio. Video now is such a big component of podcasting. So, take that for what it's worth. I do believe that the market is saturated. I do think that because of the sort of mainstream appeal that podcasting has now, you've seen just a huge influx of people jumping into the space. I think that is due for a correction. I think you'll ultimately have people that, sort of get over podcasting, but I also don't think podcasting is going anywhere anytime soon. I think it'll be around for a while and it will continue to evolve. I think it's just one of those, it's been around since 2004, and it's seen a lot of changes. So I think there's still tons of potential within the space. Just overall, I don't see podcasting go anywhere. I think there's a lot of untapped potential within the medium that we will see some big innovation in the next few years for sure, or at least I'm hoping so. And I'm happy to be along for that ride. I think a lot of the doomsday predictions that get thrown out there are usually exaggerated. People like to put stuff in articles to get clicks. And but I don't think it's going to be as bad as some of the experts think it's going to be. But ultimately, hopefully 2023 will be a year of opportunity rather than despair for aspiring and existing podcasters around the world. Well, I hope I didn't send you running for the hills, but if you're still with me and if you got any value out of this episode, please consider liking and subscribing wherever you happen to be watching or listening. Follow me on social media at Ryan Hafey on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Check out the description for relevant links and gear recommendations, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.